which one was the final question that we were going to talk about?
So everyone loves to play in small spaces because they think smaller spaces helps speed up the deciding process of the player. Is this true, or are we limiting the development of players with smaller spaces?
Well, you have to first understand, uh, zooming out a few references. One would be the brain reference, understanding that there is no free will. So every action that we're performing comes from our unconscious brain. And sometimes we become conscious of that unconscious thought. So we have a pop up, which becomes our unconscious thinking. But the the incorrect assumption is that people think that by definition now we're conscious of that thought, where in actuality it became and arose from our unconscious brain. So if I transfer that into knowing that there is no free will, the player is only adapting to a football situation that he's going to experience on the pitch. And by definition, if we play the game as a starting point 11v11, if we don't have that width or depth in our training session, the player is going to be adapting to that game situation. And then there's going to be no transfer when we move into the game. There's no transfer or learning because the player hasn't experienced depth. If there's no depth in the training session, by definition, that situation action pattern that he's that you're constantly repeating on the training session, the player is now going to unconscious brain is going to be conditioned to play to the nearest player closest to him, but by not a short pass instead of looking to play to the deepest player. But it's not his fault. It's just a natural consequence of the pitch size being so reduced with no depth or width. So we're expecting him to now become conscious of us telling him maybe throughout a training session or in the game, hey, why didn't you play to the deepest player? Like he was conscious of it. By definition, he's not conscious. We play the game unconscious because of the tempo of the game. There's less space and time, so it becomes like a reflex. The players performing every action unconsciously, every football action unconsciously.
That's an interesting starting point you started with the brain, the unconscious brain. So brain is by definition unconscious. So then and then we have conscious thoughts. So consciousness is a function of the unconscious brain. And what you're
Yeah,
saying, play the game unconsciously, and then every now and then we have a conscious thought. But so now taking the brain and within the football context, full pitch, 11v11, opponents, etc., etc. There's certain amount of space that is going to be seen on match day. And if the players do not experience that during the week, they will not be prepared for match day because their brains are not conditioned to adapt to the full size of the pitch, the context of the game. So you're basically
yeah,
doing something else.
yeah.
So football is this
Because if he, yeah,
football's this pitch size and everything. But then you always play on little spaces, sometimes rondo, sometimes rondo. So you do something else other than football, and then on the weekend you expect the player to play that pass deep, and they only play it sideways, or they always play backwards because that's just what the brain is conditioned to do. And like you said, it's no
yeah,
fault of the player. but then the coach has a certain expectation, so then they act like maniacs on the sideline, yelling at the player to play the ball deep, when all week they played only 5 yard, 10 yard passes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Goes to the definition of improving as a football player. By definition, is adapting to a new football situation with less space and time.
Not
But
to
if the
a new
player
football
doesn't
situation,
experience to a new football
overload,
situation,
overload situation.
yeah. So if he's not experiencing that in the training session, if he doesn't get that, then there will be no transfer to the game on match day.
Uh-huh.
And it's an epidemic. It's something that I think everybody in our country, in the US, every coach deals with this. And it's so difficult to navigate through this problem because we don't have the tools. So you have to find different solutions to be able to try to condition the player's unconscious brain to perceive this depth when in reality it's not his fault. He's never perceiving it in a training session because it's not there. So why would he play the ball deep to a teammate in the space behind the back line? And more importantly, if there is no free will, why would the coach yell at him for not accomplishing it? It's ridiculous when you zoom out.
Yeah.
But this is what we see every weekend. We see coaches yelling at their players because they didn't accomplish the individual intention of progressing the ball to a teammate behind the, the space behind the back line of the opposing team. He's just conditioned to play short. It's like what you mentioned with Rondo,
Uh-huh.
a tool to use possession as an objective within itself.
I would like to
When
I want to do a separate video on Rondo. We could dive really deep into that, falsifying the Rondo. But just stay on the highway. This free will. Yeah, we don't have free will, because if we had free will, we would know what we're gonna think in 5 seconds time. Or you'll be able to go to sleep without all these unconscious thoughts disturbing your sleep. You could switch off your brain at your leisure, but we both know you can't. Or if you go to a buffet and there's cake and there's fruit, and 9 times out of 10, you probably take the cake. But if you think you need to lose weight, if you tell yourself you need to lose weight, your conscious thought could help you make the decision for fruits, but there's still no guarantee because your brain is unconscious. So yeah, there's no free will. So then our jobs as coaches is to condition these brains to then perform and adapt to game situations, which is improving the player is players being able to adapt to overload football situations. But if you don't present the football situation, then they can't adapt. And then there's no overload, or there's no overload to adapt to. So then you don't improve as a player.
yeah, it's checkmate. The conditions were never set to have the player experience that behavior.
But
So
a lot of
it's
clubs only give coaches pitch size for 4v4, maybe max if you're lucky. Yeah, you've
yeah,
experienced.
well, I think everyone in this country has experienced having pitches that are an 11-11 pitch, having four teams on that pitch
Or six.
or six. Oftentimes you might get 30 meters by 30 meters and
Or
have a
less.
roster of 16 to 18 players.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck. Because now these
So
brains, these poor brains are going to be poorly conditioned
yeah, I
because of
think we
these.
talked about it. Yeah.
And what is the solution?
Well, one of the ones that we spoke about is maybe having your club, if your club is willing to, which is maybe have two teams train on the same pitch or on a particular training day. You might be able to have those teams play against each other. So now you're able to utilize the whole pitch within a specific training session. So now you can develop their communicating, but as important as that, they'll have the width and depth of the pitch. So all the ingredients of the surroundings are there in the context. So then you can better train their communicating and team intention. And the second solution that a coach might be able to apply is maybe on match day, prior to the match, if they come in an hour before the start of the match day, you might be able to have the pitch to maybe fine tune some uh team intentions that you want to have the team accomplish. That
So,
could be a tool too before a match on match day, because really you're not going to get it anywhere else if you think about it.
mhm. So so we can agree that smaller pitches limit the development of players just because they don't have now the depth. They can't communicate with the pitch, and then also because in training you could only use smaller amounts of players. So now you play more 4v4 small-sided games, quote unquote. Uh, so you have less lines of communicating, and then when the game comes, it's overload because now you have so many more lines of communicating. So then there's overload for the player's brain in terms of communicating, which then overloads the deciding because now there's more options to choose. So then, yeah, poor
Yeah,
play
it's
to the players.
it becomes we create underdeveloped players as a consequence. Players by definition now are now being underdeveloped
Or have
because we're training situation action patterns during training sessions, and these situation action patterns now will you'll develop neural networks in the unconscious brain of the player, where it just conditions them to constantly look to the nearest player instead of accomplishing, first of all, the purpose of the game. Can I score? No. Is my deepest teammate free to play to? They're not perceiving that. They're just perceiving what they've been accustomed to train throughout the whole youth uh, characteristics age group. Example, I don't know,
you are
from 6 to 10.
you're developing situation action patterns. So there's a situation, the player has a response with the action, and then you want a certain pattern. So situation, action, boom, situation, action. You want a certain situation action pattern, but you're creating situation action patterns that are not going to occur in the match.
Hmm. That's that's
That's a consequence.
that's funny. That's
Mhm.
funny. Yeah.
Or that are
This is a
not desired for the actual match or for the actual football
yeah,
text.
yeah.
Great, yeah, not undesired situation action patterns or yeah, action patterns that are not even going to exist in the
Yeah.
match. Um, but going to the first solution is as a club you work together in terms of scheduling teams on the pitch. So maybe you have the same age group, maybe one higher level, one lower level, and then one overloads the other because you could train together, or under 15, under 14, overload because they're older would be the attacking, and then they will be overload in terms of defending because they have to defend against an older opponent. And then when you want to overload attacking for this team, you put them with under 12. Then you work together as a club to accomplish this. But we both know that many clubs, or if any, don't do this. The next solution is using your warm up on match day as a training session, because then you get at least half a pitch to do things. And then solution number three could be you set up friendly match with the coach that you know, or that you create an agreement with this coach that this 11v11 match is not for our egos, but it is going to be a training session because I would like to work on something and you would like to work on something. So maybe my team can overload your team, or vice versa. And then we coach the game instead of just playing for the ego of uh of the coach for winning, or to satisfy parents that want to see their child's team win.
Yeah.
You turn it
I
into
hope that all these possible solutions that we're presenting to the coaches that are going to watch this will help them um, have kind of like a toolbox to deal with these external factors that are so common in our environment. It becomes quite difficult. You well know that.
absolutely. And then it's all at the expense of the players.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because we give this illusion that we're gonna improve the player, but when the resources are very limited, and the important thing is space, because the space is a constant, but you don't have the constant. And now you have a variable with a variable, and now it gets very difficult to identify the problem. So the players are a
Hmm.
variable, field space is a variable, because sometimes you get a third of a pitch, quarter of a pitch. Very difficult.
It's just the brain bias that many coaches have
Mm-hmm.
because they make the assumption that uh, playing in more reduced spaces uh, will give the team a higher tempo, or the non-contextual way of coaches when you hear them designing sessions based on one or two touches as an objective within itself.
Do you
It
think?
should be based on the game situation, because um, if you design a training session with a certain area of the pitch, then naturally the defending team will be more compact when they're defending, and the attacking team, by definition, now you're forcing them to build up in a way where they have only one possible way of getting behind the space, behind the middle line, or behind the back line. Or naturally, in a game situation, if the opponent is overloading the wide area, there should be space on the other area. But they have no solutions because now the attacking team doesn't have that space
Uh-huh.
to progress the ball. That space is not available for them.
Yeah.
So
The situation.
this is often defined. Yeah, this oftentimes you see it all the time in at clubs, teams training without a goal, teams training in limited space with so many players.
Hmm.
Mm. I really don't know the possible solution at this moment. I think it starts with educating the the families. I've been trying to educate one parent to see if that will spread into the team. So I have conversations with one parent, oftentimes explaining what we're describing and explaining, hoping that that will transfer into a brain of another parent and another parent.
But you do understand that this parent has to be very good at explaining.
I do. I do. That's why I try to ask them questions like a player. I try to ask them questions to see if they can respond and if it's stored in their unconscious brain as a reference. But we can dive deep into this, but we're not gonna. But
Yeah.
this is a natural consequence of pay for play. Pay for play is not conducive to player development. That's not the primary objective of clubs. So
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking that where these smaller spaces idea that players get better with smaller spaces came from, or was it just something that the head of the clubs had to sell to their coaching staff to make them believe and stop complaining about the lack of field space? Because space and time is the variable, or is a variable, as you progress higher and higher and higher up the football chain. So from lower level to the elite level, space and time becomes less, but the space is a constant. The pitch space is a constant, but space and time is a variable. So if you are using the pitch space and you're artificially reducing it, now you've artificially created less space and time. So then now players are gonna have trouble adapting to the actual space. Like you said, maybe they don't know the solution to switch the ball from one side of the pitch to the other side of the pitch because they don't have that solution. But yeah, the you're artificially creating game situations that don't exist. So and then
yeah,
players. So then the defending team that is defending in the smaller space is underloaded, and the attacking team might be overloaded because now they don't have realistic space, or the defending team doesn't is not defending in realistic space. So now they don't never learn to cover the distances, which plays a factor into football fitness. So now you wonder why they can't maintain their actions because they only have to cover 10 meters. Now they have to cover 50 meters.
yeah.
So space and time is artificial and not created by players.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how to deal with that. I'm having a hard time having pop-ups to deal with that environment, the external factors that we have to deal with.
My question 2 years ago was with the conditions that we're forced to coach in, should we change the team intention? But we both know that that is not a solution because the
No,
team intention is always the same, to exploit space behind the back line of the opposing team, regardless, which is why it's crucial that friendly matches should be a situation or an opportunity for the two coaches to coach their team within the friendly match.
just as a starting point, just yeah, I'm just trying to visualize two identical players with the same player abilities and inabilities, and one training in the context of the environment that he's going to have a full pitch, 7v7, 9v9, 11v11 with another player that never has those external factors present, that he's always playing on pitches that are reduced 40 meters by 40 meters, 30 by 30. And what's going to be the natural consequence of their development when by the time they're in a certain characteristic, like their prefrontal cortex is developed and they're 14 and above, their brain is not conditioned any longer.
Yeah, because now the brain, the eyes only perceive and send information to the brain. And if the space is so small, the eyes adapt to the space. And like we said earlier, when you go to the match day, whoa, unconscious stress.
Yeah.
You're used to small spaces, and then boom, all of a sudden,
Yeah. Yeah. We can certainly say that by definition, 95% of youth football in this country, all the players are being underdeveloped
mhm,
because of the constant. We don't have the space.
yeah, unfortunately.
Hmm. Yeah, it's something that I hope I probably won't see, but I hope one day, if it ever happens. Hmm.
Video is another tool to maybe
Video
help.
is another tool. Yeah.
So first they experience the situation, then you use video to maybe reverse engineer, which means you take the action of the player and you try to understand the thinking process of the player for that particular action. So then you use that information to then develop a training session for the group or for him in particular within the group. But
I wonder what the consequences are, because it's like the reference of the person going to the museum and having a bare brain in regards to art, and you're going into the museum with a bare brain. If the player has never experienced it, even though you might show him the video of his incompetent action, if he's not, there's no transfer. There's no way of now utilizing that as a starting point, because the reverse engineering is basically a tool for the coach to
yep.
better understand and describe and explain the problem. So how do we help the player? How do we help the player if he doesn't have the space?
Match
Hmm.
day might be the training session.
Yeah,
So now maybe you have to sacrifice winning for a learning moment, which could be difficult for coaches, but it's the reality.
hmm. Yeah. I think that's one tool that the coach could use on match day. Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Their match day might be the best solution if the club doesn't work together to combine training sessions. So then at the end they could play 11s or they start with 11s. But that means the whole staff has to be aligned, which we both know a lot of clubs probably not the case. So
Yeah,
then
they have bare brains. Yeah.
so the coaches must use friendlies and match day as training sessions.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yep. So that's probably the best solution. You don't have the pitch space. So that's the unfortunate part. So then you get a lot of
Yeah, it's
miscommunicating
horrible.
because there's more lines of
Yeah.
communication.
Yeah, it trickles down.
Big snowball effect to the deciding
The
and the executing.
yeah, yeah. The worst enemy of deciding what is miscommunicating and so trickles down to everything.
or
So
no.
even within the age characteristics, even if they're not able to, they don't have the ability to, a 6 to 10 year old based on his characteristics of that particular age group,
Mm,
you still want, it's a sensitive moment. Like the central nervous system is in a very sensitive moment.
mhm.
So you can work on the player's football technique. So maybe based on their abilities and inabilities, they're not going to be able to play the ball deep in the space behind the back line of the opponent. But we should still condition the player to perceive that space because it's still there.
I was reading
So even at that age, because oftentimes coaches make the assumption, oh yeah, but they're not able to play that ball deep.
mhm. I
But
was
the
re
constant should be there. The space should be there.
I was reading this book, Team Sports Training.
Hmm.
Let's see it. Team
Oh, I
Sports.
see it. Is that by
Javier. There we go. Oh, almost had it.
yeah, I saw some of, oh, now I see it. Yeah, now I see it.
Miss.
Complexity. Yeah.
Tell me what you think. I highlighted this. Training should include situations that incentivize the logic and rational hemisphere, as well as the emotional and creative areas. This is of special importance when training young players. The greatest amount of density of synapses is the primary cortex, and resting glucose uptake in optimal in the occipital cortex, which are parameters that correlate with creativity, are reached around the age of 7 years. And then I also highlighted tactical creativity stagnated. So they did like an experiment with the German Association, and they found that tactical creativity. So creativity is just deciding the ability.
Non-contextual word. Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm trying to translate it because it could be useful
Yeah.
information.
Funnel it. Yeah.
Tactical creativity, deciding, better deciders, or deciding stagnates above the age of 13.
I
So,
think if it's too complicated to understand, you have to have the knowledge to funnel it through the glasses of the football context.
mhm.
And I think using the references that we already have is a much easier way to describe the characteristics of football.
Because then also, I mean, I think that just that little uh, part alone just shows how important it is to introduce situations to younger players, because then once the prefrontal cortex is fully developed or gets close to being fully developed, then you have a limited brain that can that can uh, find better decisions or create better decisions for the game situation. It's like the imagination of a child when you go to the grocery store, the parents go to the grocery store, and you have a child, and this child is crying, complaining, doesn't want to be in the grocery store, rather than forcing the child to suppress the negative emotion of being at the grocery store and using imagination maybe to say, oh, okay, hey, there's dragons over there. You know, we're gonna go this way to avoid the dragons. So then we could go see the unicorn, whatever. So the brain of the player or the brain of the child has to imagine this. So he is practicing in his brain visualization, but the parents give the iPad or the cell phone and they watch dragons or whatever, unicorns on a video on the phone. So now that takes away from them having to create the visualization, which I think now going back to the football context, if you don't present that early to where the players can visualize and create solutions, then by the time they're older, you have less
Hmm.
options.
Yeah. Yeah, that's important. That's very important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, because
Especially in our context.
and then another
Especially
thing,
in a football game, in a football context, which is
yeah,
a team sport. Mm.
this is another interesting point in this book. In this book, it said this person was working with players, and they found out that players who scored less in jumping tests were the best at heading the ball. So
Mm.
absolute jumping versus relative jumping,
Mm.
because these players that were very good absolute jumpers are not good at communicating with the game situation, and then the signal from
Mm.
the brain to the muscle versus another the player who is very good at relative jumping and heading. They can
Yeah.
communicate well, and so now the signal from the brain to the muscle situation action patterns. So this is in the bottom it says of this page, perception and cognition precedes movement, which we know it's communicating, deciding precedes executing. So same thing. The player has to communicate, decide, and then they execute. And it also finishes with more important to the study of contextual speed related to game specific situations. So that means execution or executing decision is relative to the game situation, and technique. So technique is relative to the game situation and not absolute thing like gymnastics.
Yeah.
So that it makes it even more important that players must experience the game so they can communicate and have all these solutions available to them. So then they can become better deciders. So then they can execute better. But if that's not present, then the development is so
Yeah.
limited.
Yeah.
Okay, Luis, any final reflections?
No, just thinking about the evolution of the game, of the knowledge that we've gained through science, understanding how the brain of a human being works and how that transferred to a football player, because by definition, a football player is a human being just playing football, and how all these things are being overlooked. Because you just mentioned that, and I had the pop up of block training, random training, how oftentimes coaches perceive their first initial experience of random training, they see the player executing something over and over, and they make the assumption that because that's being executed, the first action and the second action, he's getting feedback from the first action. So now he's having conscious thoughts because the coach is giving him feedback. So he goes back and performs the same action. So action two is better than action one, and action three is better than action two. But the game is random.
Yeah.
In the game, you're going to perform different actions because of the position, moment, direction, and speed of the opponent. It's always going to be random. So you're playing unconsciously, and that conscious feedback that you got during the training session, you're not getting it in the game because it's non-linear.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about that because you were mentioning that, and I had the pop up of why we see so much block training at clubs, why we see so much basic action at clubs, because the coaches make the assumption that they're seeing improvements and that's going to transfer to the game. If they don't understand the the references towards how the unconscious brain works, they have no understanding. So from that point, it's well, it's a lot. It's a lot to for a coach that has a bare brain to kind of grasp. It's we've talked about this. We talked about this. How to design maybe a situation at training where you can have you don't have to express your knowledge, but the knowledge is needed by the coach because you're creating a situation where in the conversation by asking questions that coach might now come back to you because he's eager to understand more about what you're trying to describe and explain instead of just throwing it out there. Because if we just throw all these references to a coach with a bare brain, he's not going to have a clue what we're talking about. And we're just going to lose him right off the bat. As a consequence, the players are the ones that pay the price.
Yeah.
They are paying a price, but it's not pay to play, but they are paying a price.
I'm trying to find this because like you said, block training could just be an illusion. Block training is basically repeating the same action. So like 1 week you work on this, like passing, and the next week you work on dribbling. But then, like you said, the player is not experiencing the randomness of the game. So then yeah, you work on dribbling and it's an illusion. But then when you get to the game, the player is not performing dribbling all the time. And it's a random sequence. It's chaos. The game is chaos. And I found it.
Oftentimes it might be explicit learning instead of implicit learning.
Let me know what you think. Let's see. If we want to improve the performance of a player, training should resemble as much as possible the characteristics of his performance environment. Decisions are constrained by what the environment allows in relation to the action capacities of each player. Team sports should be context dependent. So, yeah, everything revolves around what the game is, and training should be what the game is and not something else. Because there's another quote, which is very interesting. Having a team of intelligent players married to uncertainty rather than obedient players who move according to instructions of the coach. Chaos has the tendency to reorganize itself. So having players who are comfortable in the chaos of football, in the chaos of what is football, and that are comfortable with uncertainty, that can organize themselves, that can self-regulate themselves within chaos. That's what you get to. But if you don't introduce chaos into the training session, good luck in the match because it's absolute chaos.
Yeah. I wonder how that transfers to the understanding of the coach, because the coach might have brain bias as well. Because every coach wants to maybe design a situation through his situation coaching, might design a situation to provoke a desired behavior. And by having chaos within the session and maybe not in that particular session, not seeing the competent behavior of a certain line or a certain player expressed at that time, he will take it in a negative way towards the design of his session. Because I was reflecting on one of the personal development player no, not personal development, sorry, on the evolution course, the the neuroscience about specificity versus repetition. And there really is no learning transfer in the training session. It all occurs when our unconscious brain is back home, when the player might be sleeping. And this is where the development of whatever you designed might have a transfer. I'm trying to better grasp if we're supposed to see during our situation coaching. If we don't see it, if we see random chaos and it's not working the way we want, does it necessarily mean that there was no learning, no transfer to learning? Because we're not supposed to see that based on what I understood. We don't see the learning in the training session itself. It only later develops in the player. This is something I have to go back and read. He explained it in a way that I can't articulate it, but he said that specificity, less repetitions, more game-like in the context of 11v11, you might get a lot of chaos and you might not be able to get out of your training session the competent behaviors that you wanted out of the players, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there was no learning effect. Everything could have gone wrong in the training session.
Yep.
But maybe on match day they perform well what you were trying to accomplish during the training session, which you didn't see in the training session, but then it transfers to the match day. Because the learning actually happens after the training session, not during.
So
that's when the transfer happens.
It's safe to say, if you're coaching and you execute a training session and it goes very smooth, something definitely went wrong.
Yeah. Yes. And that's our brain bias, because we get dopamine out of designing a situation where everything seems to run smoothly from the start to the beginning, and we get the behaviors that we wanted. But is that really the game? Because we're the ones that design the session. So is that really what we want? So I was just reflecting on that. That I found that interesting when he said that. I wonder if that will lead more to coaches having bigger games as a starting point, where they might see a lot of chaos and randomness that replicates the game, instead of maybe less players, more repetition, where things work out smoothly because there's less channels of communicating, and now hopefully less miscommunicating develops into better deciding what. But does that really transfer to the game, or do
Depends.
Yeah, depends. Yeah.
Yeah. But chaos needs to be present, and if chaos is not present and things run very smooth, something went definitely wrong in your training session. Because yeah, you have to create problems and new problems in constant overload situations for players. If there's no overload, like we said, there's no adaptation.
Yeah.
There's no improvement. So
yeah,
very nice.
That's logical. Yeah, that was good.
Luis,
that was interesting. Okay.
thank you very much for this conversation. I hope people.
You're welcome, Memo. It was time. It was due. I kept delaying the moment. So I'm happy to have been here, and I'm gonna have a lot of pop-ups when this video is done. Then I'll rewatch it, and then we can get together and discuss something that we might have had out of this conversation. We get to have a new discussion with new pop-ups and reflections.
I look forward to it. And
Yeah,
speaking of training, these this has been 3 hours now, but our brains have been conditioned to boom, 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 maintain this tempo.
yeah. Hopefully,
So
hopefully it
Dubai
transfer. Yeah, yeah,
saw this in 3 parts, but this was one conversation.
yeah. It was interesting. It was interesting talk.
So very nice.
Interesting argument.
Good
Okay.
luck. Good luck with your coaching. Good luck with your teams, and hopefully we
Thank
can
you,
have
Memo.
and very soon.
Ho- Hopefully we have another conversation. I'm sure we will. Okay.
Ciao,
Thank
ciao.
you. Thanks to everyone. Bye bye.